figured I'd do a video since it's Halloween. Happy Halloween. I got this bag of candy sitting here next to me to go through while I make the video. So hopefully it lasts a while, or at least takes a bunch of different takes. Who knows? But I figured I would sit here and tell the very first story of me versus Walmart. The kind of the story that kicked off this series, and figured I'd finally tell that one. Before I get started though, I'm wearing, actually this is pretty much my new favorite shirt, 44 Magnum. The mighty 44 Magnum. It's one of my personal favorite rounds. So I got this from Forged for Freedom. They sent it to me. So if you're interested in getting cool shirts like this, there's a link in the description that'll take you to their website. The link does help out my channel a little bit, so it's appreciated. But getting on to the story, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the first time I had to deal with Walmart, or at least had an extreme negative experience with them and their sporting goods counter. Now, I just moved into the area. The previous Walmart I used to go to was not nearly as bad as the one I'm now going to. I had a few minor things where I'd have to call someone over to the counter. No big deal, really. But this was one of the first times going into my new store. So I went into the Walmart and I was shopping, and I went to the sporting goods counter to see what they had, because, you know, their stock's always changing. So I walked up, saw that they had, I believe it was 45 or something, I forget what it was I decided to get that day. But what happened was I saw they had ammo. So I looked around, there was no customer, so I proceeded to call the front desk, as I usually did, because I was used to doing that at my other store. But I usually called the front desk and had them send someone. So I called the front desk and I asked them to send someone to sporting goods. Oh, okay, we'll page someone. Well, no page or anything go across. I'm like, whatever, maybe they did it over the walkie-talkie. So wait about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, still nobody showed up. Called again, waited for them to show up, still didn't show up. At this point, it's been about 20 minutes, and another guy walks up, and he wants ammo too, or I think he may have wanted a hunting license. I don't remember what he wanted, but he needed assistance as well. So I called the store, and I said, I'm like, look, you know, there's now multiple people standing back here in sporting goods. It's been about 20 minutes, and I'm still waiting. So, oh, okay, we'll send someone, you know, the typical response. So by the time I get off the phone, I happen to look over in the next dial, and now this Walmart, the sporting goods, right next to like the hunting section is like the bike section. And you had, you know, these kids that were messing around. They were riding the bikes around the store and messing with the stuff, and I guess they got a hold of a skateboard or something and were, you know, messing around, running into stuff, knocking stuff off the shelf. Now, frankly, I didn't care, but I was kind of irritated, so I called in the front desk again. I'm like, well, by the way, you've now got, I think there was a third person standing there at that one. You've got 3 people standing in sporting goods, and you've got kids now playing with the bikes and skateboards and stuff, smashing stuff and throwing it on the floor. I'm like, so you might want to send somebody back here at some point. Well, this, of course, finally prompted somebody. So I had some woman that looked like she was a manager, not necessarily the manager, but a manager. And she came over, and of course, she finally walked over and told the kids to knock it off. And then so after she was done yelling at the kids, she came over to us, and I said how I needed ammunition, and she, of course, thankfully had the keys on her, which I've had plenty of times where they don't even have the keys on them. And she got out the ammunition I needed, and me and the guy had been talking for a little bit since we'd been standing there for 20 minutes waiting. And we had been talking about, because at that point Walmart had just changed their policy of you had to be 21 or older to purchase any form of ammunition and any firearm. Now Walmart only sells rifles, and in Pennsylvania and pretty much federally you have to be 18 to buy a rifle, right? Right. But what happened was they changed it to 21, which is their corporate policy and they're allowed to do. Now, as she was ringing up my ammunition, it was either me or the guy behind me who just merely asked her about the change, where it wasn't attacking her about it, it wasn't her idea, she just works there, but said, what made Walmart decide to change that? At which point she, who was already, she was in a pissy mood because she had to come over and help us. I guess, she didn't think it was part of her job to assist customers, but hey. Um, so her response was that, oh, well, that wasn't Walmart's decision, that was federal. That the government said they had to change it. At which point I piped up and I'm like, well, ma'am, I think you're mistaken. I'm like, I'm well aware of, uh, the fact that they were talking about possibly changing it. And by talking about it, there was many anti-gunners calling for the change, but there was no real talk of changing it, at least not officially. So what happened was she told us that it was the government, this was a federal decision to change it to 21. So I, like I said to her that there was no federal change, and she's proceeded to start to argue with me. She's like, "Oh yes, there is. It came down that you have to be 21 now." And I'm like, "Well, ma'am, what could you cite me where it came from?" And she's like, "Oh, I don't know. It came down," and she said the wire, which I'm not quite sure what she meant. I don't know if maybe that's something they consider their internal, like communications or something. But she said the wire, and I didn't quite know what she meant at that point, but I wasn't going to get into it. So I said again to her, I'm like, well, ma'am, I happen to follow this quite closely. And the guy behind me had also said the same thing, but I'm like, I follow this quite closely, and there is no federal change to 21. I'm like, that is your corporate policy change. I'm like, I was just asking if you knew what the reasoning for Walmart changing their corporate policy was. And she, of course, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, as far as I know, it's federal. I'm like, well, no, ma'am, it's your corporate policy. I'm like, and you are within your rights as a company to change your policy. You're a private company. You're allowed to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't violate anything, federally. Which, I guess you could kind of argue the fact that changing the age could be, but whatever. Um, and she just continued. You could tell she didn't want to have that conversation, so she just, basically finished ringing me out and didn't answer the question or didn't say anything, and handed me my stuff, and that was the end of it. So what I did was, because she argued with me, I'm like, well, I want to find out what the deal is, because she didn't know, and I don't blame people for not knowing. There's nothing wrong with that. There's lots of things I don't know, and if I don't know it, I'll say I don't know. But for her to sit there and quote me law and argue with me and tell me that it's federal law that you have to be 21 to buy any type of firearm or any type of ammo kind of irritated me. Especially the fact that I had stood and waited for half an hour. When you stand and wait for something for half an hour and then the person finally gets there and you have to have them argue with you, it's kind of irritating. So I left and I called the corporate number and I got a hold of a nice woman and I said to her, I'm like, look, I was just in one of your stores and I said, the woman, I saw that your recent change to the age of 21 for a purchase of ammunition or firearms has taken effect. I was just curious, if all your staff was aware of that. And she's like, oh, yes, they are. I'm like, well, the woman I talked to, and I retold the story. I'm like, the woman I talked to, insisted that it was a federal thing. I'm like, no disrespect, but I do follow this quite closely, which I explained to the woman in the store, and there's been no federal change. And while I respect your ability as a company to change your policies, I find it very irritating when I have to have a manager argue with me about something that they don't know and don't understand, but that they're going to argue with a paying customer, I might add, about something they don't understand. So she said, yes, that's completely inappropriate for them to argue with you, especially when they don't understand it themselves, and we're sorry about that. So the next day I got a call from the actual manager of the store who apologized to me and Said, yes, that shouldn't have happened that way. It is our policy has changed, and people should be aware of it's our policy, and that's how we do business. I'm like, I understand that. You're a private company. I might not necessarily agree with your changing the age to 21, but being that I'm well over 21, it really doesn't affect me that much. So, plus, even if it did, even if I was under the age of 21, there's other places to go buy ammunition. So it doesn't really affect me. I just find it very irritating to have to stand and wait for half an hour for service as a paying customer, and to then after waiting a half an hour have to be argued with by a woman who doesn't know the law or your policy. So what they did was they threw me a $20 gift card. That was the first instance that happened. There's many others, as I've told over the time, and I might actually have another one coming out later. But feel free to comment down below what you think. If you've ever had any experience where you've had to argue with someone over law, stuff like that. I know some stores and places, when they sell ammunition, can be kind of weird about it, and will, because they don't understand the law. But feel free to comment below, and have a good day.